Can you solo in nullsec? The answer is yes, but there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking to kind of break out on your own and still operate in null. I figure in this video I'm going to share kind of my experiences and kind of the, I guess, progression I went through from just being part of a normal corporation like most people are to kind of where I'm at now and kind of why I made the certain decisions along the way. One of the big things to consider when you're going null is you're going to have cost associated. Everything, like if you're going to be renting in nullsec, right, the powers that be are going to have a cost assigned to you operating and existing in null. So you have to decide, what are you trying to get out of null? What are you trying to accomplish? How much can you play? How much do you normally play? And how much income you can actually generate and that you're willing to put towards just existing. Now, we'll start this off with kind of like story time, right? Whenever I first went to null after, high sec, I was part of, a alliance, a corporation, a mining corporation rather. So obviously at my corporation level, we were responsible for like buybacks and things like that to help support the alliance for the most part. But as a player, as a single solo player myself, I was not necessarily responsible for rent. I wasn't responsible for, I guess the administrative cost and fees and fines and all that stuff that goes into what you would normally have to worry about. So it was an opportunity for me to skill up. It was an opportunity for me to learn game mechanics. It was an opportunity for me to just kind of figure out how everything works in that kind of ecosystem that is null. Now, after I left that corporation, left that alliance, that's when I started my own corporation where I had, basically myself with Sinowaltz and everything like that. And I did at one point rent a system in nullsec. But I quickly decided that I didn't want to dump a ton of money every month into just existing in null, especially when my playtime was extremely limited, because there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're going out solo. So the first category we're going to talk about is just solo renting, right? Because chances are you're not going to get a null as a solo corporation and find a system that you don't have to pay somebody else for, right? And now let's talk about responsibilities. A player-owned starbase, a pause plus fuel, right? These are highly recommended, especially if you're going to be doing everything to meet the alliance's requirements for renting. And having that pause running means that you're going to be using fuel per hour. If you have your own structures, which you probably will, because you're going to want to dock, especially if you want to grow and do certain things like manufacturing, those structures are going to require fuel. So at the very top, after you pay rent, after you do all these things, you're still going to have fuel requirements. And yes, you can buy these fuel blocks from somebody else. You can import them, and that costs obviously for getting them jumped out or whatever. But in most cases, for what I was doing, I was just making the fuel blocks because I had the skills to do so. The other things you have to realize is ADMs, your indexes. Now, alliances are going to have requirements for you to keep these at. This is your military, and this is your industry. These are indexes that are required at a certain level, whether it be wartime or maritime or whatever. And the ADMs are easy enough as a solo player. Like if you go out and do like ice or moon, your industry is, and if you're doing ice to like make fuel blocks, you kind of like two birds, one stone, right? Because you mine ice to make fuel blocks, and the industry index is based off M3 over a certain amount of time. So ice is the best way to actually increase your industry index. But then also you're gonna have to worry about ratting, because that's one of the more important ones, is like your military index, and the alliance is going to want to keep all their military indexes as high as possible, especially during wartime. And right now, if you're in an alliance, chances are they're probably involved in some sort of war. And then obviously your iHub upgrades. If you want anything, if you want to customize your system that you're renting, if you want more ratting sites, or if you want the ore anomalies, which requires the ore prospecting arrays, or the prospecting arrays, you're going to be in charge of paying for those, and you can't get those back, right? That's kind of like rigging a Tatara, or, putting rigs on things like that. Like when you pay for an iHub upgrade, you're not going to get that money back, and in most cases, your rent is going to go up because of the iHub upgrades that have already been installed, so keep that in mind. Let's talk about cost, and this is going to differ for a lot of alliances, but for the most part, the system you're looking at is going to have a base cost, and then they're going to add premium value onto that system for if it's a dead end or if it has ice, and then that price is going to fluctuate up or down depending on the number of planets or the number of moons. And then, if you're a solo player and you're not able to keep your ADMs up, the alliance may come in and actually boost your ADMs to their standard. And if they do that, chances are they're going to have you pay a fine for them having to manage that for you. And then also, depending on what iHub upgrades are already present in that system, they're going to increase the price on that as well as just added value. Now, you don't just, system availability is going to be your biggest issue, because a lot of dead end systems that have ice, like this would be like the ideal system, right? Having a dead end system with ice, with a good amount of, with the planets, like you want minimum, at least a lava, and then gas, and then barren, right? I would say. Because if you're going to make your own fuel blocks to help sustain your structures and your POS and everything, you're going to want to set up PI, and these are going to be the bare minimum requirements to set up for your PI to make your fuel blocks, and then you have to do ice. I prefer making ice blocks for my structures and stuff like that because it helps with the industry index, but you can also import it, right? So this was the route I actually went when I first went solo, right? And it requires a lot of networking. It requires a lot of, because like most of the time alliances are going to have a minimum member count for a corporation. Because what you have to keep in mind is if somebody does recon on your system, because when you put a structure out, anybody can come in that structure, look at whose corp it is, and they can start doing research on your corp. If they find out that you're a solo player with a structure, then you're going to be on the top of the target list. So you're going to get your timer, ticked almost constantly, because they know that the response fleet would have to be the alliance and not necessarily come from the corporation. So you got to realize you're extremely vulnerable as a structure owning solo corp, right? Now, this is not impossible, right? You can do this, and like I would say, like with all of this, if you even have the best system in the world and everything was set up, you're probably going to pay, depending on what your system rent is, and I've seen them go anywhere from 2 billion to upwards to 8 billion a month for a system, and it all depends on everything that goes into that system and how much it's valued. You're probably, if you get a really good system, you're probably going to pay, I would say 8 to 10 plus a month, which means that you're automatically going to be required to play a certain amount in order to, if you want to have structures, if you want to actually set up, proper, if you want to have structures, you're going to have to play a lot in order to make your fuel blocks, to fuel your structures and your POS, keep your ADMs up, and get all the iHub upgrades you want. And after all your costs, have enough ISK left over to actually grow your character and grow your kind of your operation. Now let's talk about like skills that would be required for you to do this successfully. You need decent ratting skills because you want to be able to pump that military index. You want to be able to rat enough to keep that index up yourself. Then also you need some like ice and moon mining skills. This is to make fuel blocks and also to pump the industry index. Most of the time, alliances will rent out the moons separate from the system. So even though you're renting a system, doesn't mean you actually have access to the moons. They're going to rent all those moons out on a different. That's not even included. Like you get access to everything in your system, probably except for moons. That's generally how I've seen it done, which isn't a bad thing, because if you're renting a system and you're worried about keeping your ADMs up, your industry index up, then if the alliance is renting moons in your system to other corporations, that's actually good for you, because when those people come in and mine those moon pops, they're actually helping your index. So then all you have to really worry about is kind of like everything else, right? So don't get too bent out of shape on that. And that's really one of the benefits of moon mining. If you're not actually doing inventions, or if you're not actually using the moon goo for stuff, it's really kind of just a tool to help you keep that index up. And then you have PI, right? And that's why I went back to saying you need like lava, gas, barren planets, because you want to be able to set up PI so that you can make the PI for the fuel blocks and then mine the ice. And so you can kind of keep your costs down for importing. And obviously you need some manufacturing skills in order to make the fuel blocks as well, which isn't, too crazy. I mean, you definitely probably do want an engineering complex if you're going to be making fuel blocks. So you keep that in mind. In most cases, for a successful, like legit operations in Null, even at a solo level, you're still going to be looking at having a citadel and some sort of refinery and then some sort of engineering complex. So you got to worry about 3 structures and then a POS, right? The other thing to realize too is several months ago, earlier this year, medium structures got a huge nerf. So most alliances are not really willing for you to drop medium structures, with the exception of Athenors for moon mining specifically. So when it comes down to like citadels, they won't necessarily let you drop an Ostra house, but they're going to be more inclined to, they're going to want you to drop like a Fortizar or a Tatara, or probably a Taru or something like that. Like it's very they're not going to feel very comfortable with you dropping medium structures. With that being said, you have a lot more fuel requirement when you're looking at those larger structures. Now, I did this for a while. It's very possible. It's extremely possible. If you have the skill set for your characters and you're able to do all this, you can make a killing. One thing you have to worry about is you're going to have blues, which is like alliance members or something like that. They're going to come in, they're going to run your rat sites, they're going to run your data sites, and it's going to be a full-time job keeping people off your stuff, which there's alliance-based rules on all this, but it's really kind of a losing battle, and you can't let that really upset you, and it gets really annoying. But also you have to worry about just like regular newts coming through and kind of interrupting the whole like operations to keep everything running. For me, I just didn't play enough at the time to really warrant it, and plus I didn't really want to have all these costs and all these fuel requirements, because even when you're not online and you're not playing, those POSs, those structures are still using fuel, so you have to always be thinking about that. Instead, what I do and what I suggest most people do, if you want to go solo and you want to be in your own corporation, is to just subrent. And this requires like some networking. This requires you to have some friends that you've played with in that area, and and what the subrent is essentially like you're going to subrent a system from a corporation that's already renting a system, and they're already doing all of this with multiple people, and you're going to come in, you're going to subrent, you're going to be in agreement with that corporation about a cost per month, and that's going to be your requirement. And then depending on what your need is, like, for me, generally speaking, I'm doing like, exploration, and I'm doing ratting. I do very little mining anymore in nullsec. And so when I go and I, negotiate a subrent agreement with somebody, I'm, bring to the table things like, okay, I will pay you a X amount of ISK per month to subrent. I will be ratting in your system to help with the ADMs, the military index, and then I will also be helping clear data relic sites to keep, signatures off of the agency, and any sort of help I can also do for, moon mining or whatever the case may be, is possible. But for the most part, when you subrent, you're basically just providing a service to that corporation to help them with all this up here. And in the case of what I'm doing right now, when I'm subrenting, I'm basically just ratting and doing data relic sites. So a lot of my value as a subrenter comes from actually just helping with the ADMs and the index for all the ratting and stuff that I'm doing. Now, obviously, if I'm doing a lot more to help them out, if there's a lot more things that you're doing to help out, then it makes it even more appealing. So, and like you could also make the argument of like, well, that's not really solo if you're like, technically helping that corporation with their ADMs in the system. But the thing is like, as a subrenter, I'm not part of like any fleets that corporation might do. I'm not part of like moon mining requirements or obligations. I'm paying that corporation a fraction of like a little bit of ISK for their like going towards their rent and to help with their ADMs. And I think that's a lot better, because like whenever I don't play as much as like normal people do, I do not have to worry about a lot of these ticking clocks as far as fuel and everything goes. I think eventually in the future I might go back to a full system rent, but it's a lot to keep up with, especially if you just don't want to. If I'm all over the place, I'm doing stuff in like all different aspects of New Eden. So if you're 100% only wanting to do things in nullsec in one system, and this is kind of where you want to exist, then you can kind of set up for this. But I found that like just subrenting is a lot better. So, and that's just going to require you to actually play with other people. Unfortunately, like networking, right? Like I wasn't able to become a solo player out the gate without like knowing people. And like people know, the people that I play with, or the people that know me, they kind of know how I am and how I like to play solo, but they also see the value that I bring to their systems. And so that's what you have to build for yourself. You have to kind of, build a reputation of like, okay, yeah, they're really good ratters or they're like really good miners, and so bringing them in as a sub-renter means that we can not worry so much about maybe the industry index or the military index, or maybe they'll just sub-rent and come in and use our structures and they'll build fuel blocks and they'll sell them to us and we don't have to worry about mining that ice or doing those fuel blocks. So knowing what the requirements are to run a system and then figuring out where you fit in and then sub-renting to add to that value is pretty much the way to go if you want to like not pay a crap ton towards an alliance or whatever. So hopefully that kind of helps. I know there's a lot of people that had some questions about all that kind of stuff, and like we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff, in the future, as far as like the difference in regions, like finding an area of Null to actually rent out of. But it really kind of depends on like kind of where you've been already operating. If you haven't operated in Null at all, then you're kind of open to like, start recruiting, right? And you're going to have to get into a corporation in that alliance and build a reputation and then try to break out and do things on your own. But being solo doesn't mean you have to be in your own corporation, right? You can be in a corporation you can find a really good corporation that doesn't require a lot from you, as long as you're able to like help them in some sort of degree on the stuff that they're responsible for. For the longest time, I would have considered myself a solo player, even being in a corporation of 10 or 15 or even 20 people. I logged in every day, did my own thing, and my actions helped the corporation or the alliance on some sort of responsibility, and so they left me alone. It's the people that log in and don't really do anything, or like they're just kind of like hanging out docked, which they're just kind of taking up space, that they're really more worried about. If you're adding value, that's the biggest thing. If you add value to your corporation or alliance, then that goes so far as building relationships and things like that. But hopefully that answers your question. If you can you solo in Null? Yes. You just have to know what you want to do, how much you're willing to pay, what are your goals, right? We're going to cover more topics in future videos as far as like regions and kind of just like other considerations, but figure we'll just kind of keep this video on the topic of can you solo operate in Null. But anyway, thank you for watching, and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.